There's a story that Judaism doesn't like to tell, a story that is too embarrassing, too catastrophic to process, but dangerous to forget. It's the time that the Jewish world thought that the messianic redemption had finally arrived, but instead they got betrayal. Today we'll be discussing the catastrophic events surrounding the false messiah Shabtai Tzvi, but more importantly, the damage that it caused to the Jewish world, a trauma that has shaped the Jewish world until today. And by the way, don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment. It's totally free.
Nope.
In the 1600s, the Jewish world thought that it was finally over. The exile, the humiliation, the silence from heaven. It finally looked like the endless prayers and fasting and mystical mental gymnastics were all about to pay off. Families were packing their bags for Zion. Prayers were being rewritten. Property was being sold. Even divorces were being arranged in preparation for this new messianic age, because apparently that makes sense in some false messiah-addled brain. But then their messiah converted to Islam, publicly in front of the Ottoman court with a new turban and a new name. Not so much as a prophetic excuse, no fire from heaven, no trial, just a bland surrender and a government job offer. And here's the kicker. This wasn't a fringe movement. This wasn't some apocalyptic cult of a few wackadoodles in a cave somewhere. This was mainstream Judaism, backed by top rabbis, public leaders, and the top of the kabbalistic scholars. This was theological consensus across the Jewish world. And Shabtai Tzvi didn't just crash and burn. He exposed something that was much deeper. The rot wasn't in him alone. It was in a system that allowed him to rise. A religious world built on mystical speculation and authority with no accountability. This wasn't just a messianic disaster. This was a full-blown theological collapse in Judaism. Now, to understand how someone like Shabtai Tzvi could hijack the Jewish world like that, you have to understand what he was working with. This wasn't some stable, rational tradition suddenly led astray. This was a system already bloated with mystical speculation, right at the edge of madness. And then all it took was a national trauma to shove everything right over the edge. At the time, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and the Ottoman Empire together housed over half of the world's Jews, and for a time, Poland was the Jewish dream. Autonomy, education, land ownership, it was as close to peace as exile had ever gotten for the Jewish people. But then came 1648, the Khmelnytsky uprising. Cossack rebels tore through the Jewish world like a firestorm. Jews were seen as enforcers of the Polish oppression, and the response to them was brutal and apocalyptic. Synagogues were torched with people still inside, children were mutilated, and entire communities were brutally erased. Conservative estimates say that 20,000 Jews were killed, but they weren't the only ones. Catholic priests, monks, Polish nobles, all massacred. It was indiscriminate slaughter. And here's where it gets grotesquely ironic. In 1648, it was supposed to be the year of the redemption. According to Kabbalistic interpretations and apocalyptic readings of the Zohar, this was the year the Messiah was supposed to arrive. But instead of a Messiah coming, they got a terrible massacre. But did that lead to introspection or a sober reevaluation of these mystical speculations? Of course not. It fueled the madness. In the warped logic of the Lurianic Kabbalah, which was spreading rapidly in the Jewish world at the time, suffering was proof that the final redemption was imminent. The more pain, the more sparks, divine sparks, were being freed, and the closer the cosmic redemption. You'd think that a tragedy like this at this particular time would lead to some kind of theological humility, but instead it led to full-blown messianic addiction. And this is where Shabtai Tzvi comes in. Shabtai Tzvi, born in 1626 in Smyrna, modern-day Turkey, brilliant from a young age, devout, charming, was completely unhinged. By his 20s, he was already declaring himself the Messiah, then retracting it, then declaring it again, and this pattern went on, religious highs followed by manic collapse. He once placed a fish in a baby's cradle, claiming that this was a sign of Israel's rebirth under the sign of Pisces. Right. Another time he married a Torah scroll. These weren't symbolic acts. They were his headlines in his personal messianic apocalypse. He once asked his followers if they had seen him levitate, and when they said no, he claimed that they just weren't purified enough to see it. So his critics assumed that he was just insane, but his rabbis mostly just wanted him gone, and he was banished several times. But madness in a culture drunk on mysticism looked a lot like revelation to people. The more erratic he became, the more people assumed he was touching on something divine. And that's where enters Natan of Gaza. A young mystic with visions of his own, well-respected, he declares Shabtai the real Messiah. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, literally, the long-awaited Redeemer. Natan gave theological legitimacy to Shabtai's mania. He framed the mental instability as sacred behavior, a necessary descent into evil for the sake of ultimate redemption. And that's where things totally exploded. Letters flooded the Jewish communities. Communities began preparing for mass aliyah to Israel. Women started reading from Torah scrolls in public. Former heretics were elevated to leadership roles. Jewish life was turned upside down overnight. This was a hostile takeover of the Jewish world, wrapped in mysticism, sold as redemption, and the entire rabbinic world went along with it. Then came the part that should have raised every red flag for everyone, but instead was treated like sacred innovation. Shabtai started purposely breaking the Torah, publicly, proudly, and systematically. Fast days became feast days. Mourning was completely outlawed. Why would you mourn with the messianic age at hand? Traditional blessings were replaced. He purposely ate forbidden foods, violated every taboo he could find. And what did his followers do? They cheered, they sang, they participated, and they rejoiced. Because you see, this wasn't sin anymore. Not according to Natan of Gaza. This was redemptive sin. The idea that the Messiah had to descend into the muck of evil in order to liberate the divine sparks trapped there. And he took this out of the Zohar, the same 13th century forgery that became the blueprint for modern Jewish mysticism. The Zohar hints, often cryptically, that in the messianic age, the outer garments of the Torah, of the Jewish law, would fall away, and only its mystical core would remain. And the Sabbateans, that is the followers of Shabtai, took that to mean, bye-bye Torah. So in this warped logic, holiness was hiding in the unholy. By breaking the commandments, it wasn't rebellion, it was restoration. The Messiah wasn't coming to fulfill the law at all. He was coming to dismantle it from the inside for mystical purposes. You can think of this as a kabbalistic theology worship being led by Satan. Then it all came crashing down in 1666. Yes, really. That was the year, the one burned into everyone's brains. The Kabbalists had been whispering about it for decades. The redemption would come, the exile would end, Shabtai would ascend. And technically, they were partly right. He did ascend to Constantinople, where the Sultan had him arrested for treason. Now, here's where messianic fervor meets geopolitical reality. The Sultan didn't care about divine sparks or inverted fast days. He gave Shabtai two options: perform a miracle and prove you're the Messiah, or convert to Islam. And what did Shabtai do? He performed No, that's not right. That's right. He chose the Ottoman turban and a new Ottoman name. No resistance, no final prophecy, no blaze of glory, no trial and execution, just a quick change of religion secretly, a new bureaucratic government job, and a new Ottoman name. The movement unsurprisingly imploded. Some of his followers wept, others raged. Some followed him into Islam, forming the Donmeh, a crypto-Sabbatean sect that continued believing in secret until this day. But for most people, the spell was broken. The rabbis went silent, the letters stopped, the miracles evaporated, and everyone began trying to pretend like it never happened. The revisionism went into complete overdrive. Natan of Gaza spent the rest of his life trying to justify it. He said to people that Shabtai only converted to Islam to redeem the hidden sparks of the divine hidden in Islam. Sure. Meanwhile, the man who had been hailed as the Redeemer of Israel died in lonely obscurity a decade later. No Elijah, no return, just another failed prophet with delusions and followers too embarrassed to admit that they were duped. But what's worse than a false Messiah? A religious system that refuses to learn from it. The Jewish world at first tried to bury this, scrub it from memory, edit the text, burn the letters, pretend that none of it ever happened. But it did happen, and it left a wound in Judaism so deep that no amount of halachic hair-splitting or cultural liberal Jewish nostalgia could heal it. A wound that still exists to this day. Because this wasn't just a Messiah gone rogue, this was the entire religious framework, rabbis, mystics, legal authorities, all in on a major fraud. They gambled everything, and they lost badly. And when the dust settled, they did what institutions always do when they fail. They completely overcorrected. On one side, you got the rise of hyper-legalism. The rabbinic world humiliated, exposed. It didn't repent of this, it retaliated with more rules, more fences, more walls. Spontaneity became a major threat. Mysticism was totally chained up. Joy was regulated. Halacha wasn't just central anymore. It became a shield, a way to keep people in line and keep the chaos out. And slowly, what passed for Judaism became cold and dry and obsessed with not repeating the past, at the expense of never understanding why it happened in the first place. And on the other side, you got secularism. Many Jews just walked away. If the rabbis could be that wrong on something that big, what else had they gotten wrong? Slowly, Judaism stopped being a covenant and just became a culture, a heritage, a hollow tradition recited in Yiddish accented English over bagels and sarcastic humor. This was the Haskalah, the Jewish Enlightenment, the start of Jewish liberalism. Men like Spinoza, Mendelssohn, Herzl, not just secularizing, but trying to build something new out of the ruins. A Judaism without messiahs, without God, without anything divine. Just a cultural glue to keep a post-traumatized people from disappearing. And somewhere in between, Hasidic Judaism emerged, which was a safer mysticism, a channel for religious mysticism that wouldn't burn down the house. It tries to hold on to the spiritual without losing the halacha, without collapsing into lunacy. And it almost succeeded. Now, I say almost because then there's Chabad. Now, I want to say that Chabad didn't start this way, but today Chabad dresses itself in sophistication and outreach, but underneath, it's still whispering the same old promises, the same dangerous longings for a Messiah that's never going to come. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson, dead for decades now, still has followers calling him the Messiah. Some say he never died, others say he'll rise again. The leadership won't endorse it, but they won't shut it down either. They leave the door cracked enough to keep the fire burning for the next round of mystical disappointment or control, who knows. And then also in Chabad, there's Manis Friedman, the YouTube heretic of Chabad, preaching that God needs us more than we need him, and that Jews are beyond punishment for sins because after this long in exile, God would have to be a monster to punish the Jewish people for sins. Does that sound familiar? It's Sabbateanism with a YouTube channel, the same mystical inversion, the same redefinition of sin, justice, and Messiah, just cleaned up and market tested for a generation that is starved of meaning and purpose. And here's the kicker. It's also mainstream, and it's growing, and it's built on the same foundations that produced the disaster of Shabtai Tzvi in the first place. Because when your messiahs and mysticism keep failing publicly, catastrophically, you're supposed to stop and ask if the whole system is wrong. But instead, the Jewish world doubles down. They change the locks, repaint, but they keep the same broken blueprint. And now, centuries later, you have parts of the Jewish world pretending that Judaism is just a culture of some kind, and the other part waiting for a Messiah who's not coming. And at some point, you have to stop asking when the redemption is coming and start asking, how many false messiahs does it take before you start questioning the system that keeps producing them?